Jess Echeverry, welcome to Power and Witness.
Thank you.
You've been on Women of Grace here this week, right, with Jeanette?
Yes.
And your husband's a deacon in the church. But I wanted to talk to you about your own story, your witness. And first, why don't we begin with that? Just maybe your personal story and how you came to know the Lord and a Catholic.
Yeah, I wasn't raised in a home that taught about God or went to church or prayed, so I was unchurched in a sense. I knew who Jesus was because, a grandparent was faithful, and I had some cousins and I think an uncle who was faithful and a Christian. But outside of that, I was unchurched. My parents divorced by the time I was a year old. And there were multiple step-parents, rounds of step-parents. So a traumatic childhood. I experienced childhood trauma, molestation, and rape by the time I was 12. And that created a lot of chaos and questioning and honestly shame. I knew that what had happened was wrong. I didn't know it wasn't my fault. But I took it on as if it were my fault and just felt a ton of shame. And so I began running away at 14, group homes and CPS, custody, child protective services, and kept being returned and kept running away. And then I finally was able to stay at an extended family member's home. And at 16 became pregnant in high school, and thought I would get an abortion because that is what was expected of me at that time. And I tried. I went 3 times to the abortion clinic and got each time further in, but felt this warm rush and even this nausea over me, and I just couldn't do it. My friend who was taking me finally took me to a pregnancy help center, and that was the first time I actually realized that there was a baby there. I hadn't thought about that before. And then
what kept you from doing it? Wasn't the belief that a baby was there, or?
No, but I don't know what initially kept me. I'd like to say now as a Christian looking back, it was the Holy Spirit. But I just got sick and scared and really chickened out in a sense, and didn't do it. And then once I did realize that it was a baby, I wanted to have a baby. I thought of it as I could have my own someone to love and someone to love me. But unfortunately at the time, my parents and my family wasn't supportive of that. And so I ended up not having anywhere to go. I had to leave that family's house by a certain time,
because of the pregnancy?
Yes, because of not getting the abortion.
Right.
And so I ended up renting a room out in what turned out to be a crack and prostitution house, which I didn't realize.
Let me ask you, I'm sorry, the thing that convinced you, what convinced you that it was a child, a baby, it was a human person?
At the pregnancy help center, the woman was very nice who greeted me. She took me into a room. And she sat me down on a couch and started playing a VCR tape, right, of this video. And on the video, I just remember there being, pregnant young girls, girls holding their babies. And I just remember watching that video and realizing that this was a baby that I could have instead of just something that was a medical thing that was wrong with me that needed to be fixed.
Right.
And so that's watching that video there, that's what I realized. And so my desire to have the baby, the someone to love and someone to love me, grew.
That took a lot of courage, right? At 16 to leave the extended family home and everything. And I mean, that's...
Yeah, I think people in those situations would explain it not necessarily as courageous, but kind of like you don't have a choice. I think courage comes when you feel like you have a choice between things. And I didn't feel like I had a choice. So it was kind of
Yeah.
I don't see it as courageous because
right.
I just saw it as you just do what you got to do
Yeah.
to just
Yeah.
keep moving forward.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I would say at 16 it was a courageous thing to do. I ended up in the crack and prostitution house, and it was just a nightmare. I experienced and saw things there that still haunt me to this day. So I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to have a child there. And so I called my mom and I told her what I was going through, and I begged her to help me, and she did. She found a Christian home for unwed mothers. And so I ended up going there and finishing out my pregnancy there. Unfortunately, they didn't have resources for girls who wanted to keep their babies. So in order to stay there and have a roof over my head, I had to promise to give my baby up for adoption, which I considered because I knew I didn't have any other place to live.
Right.
And in the end, when I gave birth to my first child, at 16, I did. I signed him over to give him up for adoption because I didn't have a choice of anything else.
Right.
And I left the hospital without him, which was just another traumatic wound being added.
Because part of your decision not to have the abortion was to have and keep the baby.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah, right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that was just another wound that I was boxing up and pushing down in order to survive. I came back to the maternity home, and I fell into a really deep depression, and the father of my first child contacted me and said, I want my baby. I'm sorry you don't have the means to keep him, but me and my family will raise him. So we need to get him back from the adoption process.
And was that the first you'd heard of him during your pregnancy, or?
No, we tried to stay together. It was a boyfriend in high school.
Yeah.
We were together for a couple years.
Right.
I met him when I was 14, as soon as I started high school. And we tried to stay together during the pregnancy, but the relationship didn't survive.
Yeah.
And we broke up while I was pregnant. So I did. It had only been 2 weeks, and I told them I wanted my child back, and he hadn't gone through the court system to be adopted out yet. He was still in a foster home. And so they just null and voided the paperwork and brought him back.
Oh. So the biological father doesn't have to sign anything for adoption or anything?
I believe that he did. He was there at the hospital with me
okay.
when I gave birth. Yeah. I just remembered saying to him, "Are you sure this is what we want to do? Can't we just keep him?" Yeah. And he was just, stick to the plan. That's what he just kept saying. Right. But he changed his mind, and now here we are. And so my baby now is at his father's family's house. And I get to spend the day with him there. But then, at 11:30 at night, I have to leave. It was, the baby can stay, but you can't. So that was my first true night just out on the streets by myself. And this was in Fort Lauderdale, so I went to the beach, dug my little place in the sand, and I just thought, one eye open, I'm going to just wait for the sunrise, because if I can just get through this night, if I see that sunrise, I'm good. I can do this. I can totally do this. Been through worse is what I'm thinking. And I did. I saw the sunrise, and that gave me confidence that, okay, I got this. I can do this. Hungry, went to a local McDonald's, started looking for food left on tables and stuff like that. And at that time when I was doing that, I was encountered by a group of other, basically young kids, teenagers that were living on the streets as well. And the short story is that, they took me in and taught me how to work the streets and what to do and how to eat and how to survive and what shelters to go in and out of, and what to look out for, and so that's what I did. That's what I did. For 2 years doing that and experiencing life on the streets, it's it's hell. It's hell. There's no light out there at all.
Right.
It's pure darkness.
And were you still, like, those 2 years you were still going to your in-laws' house, or how you went?
Randomly. Yeah, randomly. It wasn't a good relationship there. Right. They were very, and looking back, rightfully so, protective over the baby from me. Yeah. Here I was living on the streets, not doing good things in my life. Right. Who's caring for a baby who wants to allow that instability in that baby's life? So the relationship wasn't great for that to happen. Right. And it was easier for me to pretend that I didn't have a baby in order for me to survive than to remind myself that I was a mom and just couldn't have my baby. Right. So, and then at 18 I got pregnant again. And this time I was all in, so to speak. I was doing all the stuff that you do to live life on the streets and get by.
But you weren't taking drugs?
I wasn't, no.
You weren't drinking?
No. I mean, look, I've smoked a joint here and there, but no. No, I needed full control of myself and my environment. And even with that full control, I still experienced a ton of abuse and aggressiveness on the streets. Yeah. So it's, I didn't want to lose control. I never thought that I would be there long. I always knew that I wouldn't stay for some reason. I can't explain it. Yeah. I knew it was, I'm just going to get through. I'm just going to get through. I'm just going to get through. And then something would be different. Yeah. I just couldn't explain to you when or how. Right. But then when I got pregnant at 18, the voice I heard in my head was, the best thing you can do for this baby is to have an abortion. And, the pain of losing my first child and not being able to have a relationship with him and living on the streets, I believed it. I believed that was the best thing I could do. The thought of having a baby and bringing that baby to the streets, experiencing what I was experiencing, and what I knew happened to kids in those situations from being in that crack and prostitution house. I couldn't do it. Right. And so I believed it. I was in a very dark place. And so I did. At 18, I went in and had an abortion of that baby.
And the difference, like being on the streets as a woman or as a man, how would you describe that difference? I would think it'd be a lot worse for the woman.
Yeah, it's extremely different. Yeah. For the most part, in my own experience and in the past 25 years of accompanying the homeless in Los Angeles, men are very aggressive on the streets in that environment. Women are a commodity. They're used. Everything is transacted. And actually, the truth is women and, young boys, very young boys, they both pretty much have the same experience on the streets, in my experience, than men.
And there are young girls out there too?
There are young girls. I'm grouping young girls with women. Females and young boys, I should say, basically have the same experience. I spent a lot of my time on the streets witnessing, male prostitution in order for us to have a hotel room for the night, and being there to send him off and being there to pick him up and collect him and have his drugs for him ready to go. There's drugs you take before you go, and there's drug you take when you get back. So that experience just vanishes, and you don't have to feel anything. Right. And that was commonplace, you know.
And like the strength of women to endure that, it seems like women have a special capacity to endure and long suffer. Um, that must be an asset of survival, right, for women
Yeah.
out there. Yeah, I would think men oftentimes are getting killed by violence between themselves.
Right.
That,
Yeah. Or yeah, I mean, I've found that life as a female on the streets is, yeah, it's so completely different than males.
Yeah.
You're so much more vulnerable. You're so much more overpowered. You don't have a choice for
Yeah.
anything.
Right.
And in ways, all homeless experience a sense
Mhm.
of that, but for women, it's so much more profound and even happens within the homeless community. In Los Angeles, you know, a lot of the homeless encampments are, if they sit too long, if they're allowed to be there too long, then what we call the life of an encampment is that the gangs come in and establish weapons and drug places within the homeless encampments. And then all of the homeless in that encampment basically become slaves to the local gangs. So that's what I mean by, in a sense, all the homeless end up feeling that way.
Right.
But outside of those circumstances, it's females and young boys who have a much worse experience, in my opinion.
So you had the abortion at 18, and then what happened? Was there any thought of like finishing high school or GED or anything?
When I was a gifted student. I was tested in kindergarten. I loved school growing up. It was my favorite place to be. I loved studying. I loved learning. I had all straight A's all the way to high school, all through middle school, everything. And then that changed, obviously, when I got pregnant. But in the maternity home, I did take classes to try and continue my high school diploma. And there was different parts during my homelessness between 14 and 21 where I was on people's couches. You know, I would go back with my mom when she divorced and moved into a place by herself. I'd go there for a time being. And so there were these moments of like little stability moments for me where I could kind of regroup. And I ended up sleeping on the couch of a friend's at a friend's in high school. And his mom was a school teacher. And they let me stay there for a little while, but she just kept saying, you know, Jess, you're so smart. Like, you have to just get your high school diploma, just finish your high school diploma. And I wasn't stable enough to do that. So she gave me the resources to get my GED. And I went to the GED office, and they give you a pre-test to see what classes you need. And I passed the entire thing, no pre-test needed. And I remember the counselor even saying to me, what are you doing taking a GED? If you went back to high school, you'd get a full ride to college with these scores. And I'm just, I don't have time for that. I don't have time for that. You know, that was my excuse. Like, that's just not what's going on in my life right now. And so I was like, just give me the test so I can do this.
Yeah.
And so I did. I took the test, obviously passed with flying colors, and so I got my GED. But that's as far as I went with that.
And did you have, like, amongst women, did you have friendship like deep friendships on the street, or?
I wouldn't say deep because you don't allow yourself to go deep in that way, because everything is transient, even relationships. The original group that kind of brought me in a sense, disbanded over time and became another group that maybe someone from that group was also. So it was, it's very hodgepodge. It's everything is just getting by, and you're kind of a victim to where the day takes you. You know, it's like being stuck in a riptide. Right? You got to surrender and just hopefully you get out the other end. That was the sense of how I felt and all of that. So no, not a lot of deep relationships from what I would say were my people, my family that I had on the streets.
So, yeah, you had the abortion and then got the GED, and then what happened?
Yeah, I actually fell into a really huge depression after the abortion. Just, before I had the abortion, I woke up every day like, let's do this, let's survive, let's see what's next. And after the abortion, I didn't even want to exist anymore.
Right.
I didn't have the energy to do or fight, or I didn't care if I got hit by a car. I didn't care if I got beaten down. Like, I didn't care about anything.
Is there a lot of suicide amongst the homeless? And
There's a lot of drug overdosing, which is a form of suicide for us. Yeah. You know that if you just put that extra shot in your arm, that's it.
Yeah.
You know how much you can handle, and even everybody around you knows how much a person can handle, because you're with each other so much and you're doing the same thing in order to survive and get resources. That you can choose that at any second. At any second you can.
And now, like with fentanyl, is that just like, has that greatly increased the overdoses and deaths from?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. When I was on the streets, it was crack. It was crack cocaine. That was the big drug that that and cocaine. There was ecstasy. Ecstasy was big.
Fentanyl seems so deadly, what you read about in the news.
Yes, it is. It absolutely is.
And were there many people finding their way to like a 12 steps groups or anything? I mean, did you see those stories, or even today in your work?
Actually, no, I don't see that currently in the families we accompany. When I was on the streets, I was in and out of a shelter called Covenant House. They're all over the country. But I was in and out of Covenant House, Fort Lauderdale, because it's right there on Fort Lauderdale Beach. I remember sometimes going in there, they had this little chapel, like tiny little chapel kind of tucked away in the corner. And I didn't know what it was. I was just walking the grounds one of my first times there. And I stumbled across this door that had a stained glass cross in it. And I just thought, oh, that's beautiful. And when I kind of peeked in and looked, it was like a small little, what I now know is a chapel. I didn't know that back then. And there was a group of people in there being led by this guy. And they were saying what I now know, I didn't know it back then either. They were saying the Our Father prayer. But I also remember that some of the kids that ended up in that shelter would go into that room and have AA meetings. So yes, it is within, I think, the shelters and the organizations that are helping the homeless. I believe that they do offer it. I never thought I needed any of that because I didn't do any of it. But it is a really great memory that I have looking back being homeless, of encountering a chapel and hearing that was the first time I'd ever heard the Our Father prayer. So when I heard it again as a Catholic, it was like, that's what that was. They were praying in there.
So you were raised completely unchurched.
Completely unchurched. Every once in a while, we'd go to my uncle's, where my cousins were. And he was and he still is, God bless him, my uncle, is a Protestant Christian, very on fire for his faith, has been his whole life. I'd go there, but the exposure was not a lot. I always felt like they were different,
Right.
And my Nana, my dad's mom, who was the closest person to me growing up, she came over from Italy with her family, and so she was raised Catholic. But and I remember being in her house, her little trailer, because she was poor. She just lived in a little mobile home down there. And I remember being in her trailer, and I remember when I was a little girl, the hall to like the bedrooms and the bathroom, she'd have all pictures of all the family and very religious pictures up. But there was one that I always touched with my hand. I call it the velvety heart of Jesus. It was like a 70s picture of Jesus with like the slick back hair. and everything was shiny on it. But the heart, this, which I now know is the Sacred Heart, that Sacred Heart was made of velvet, a red velvet. And so as a little girl, I remember always going up and touching it and not having any idea what I was doing or who that was.
Yeah.
And she would have beads. I remember her. Now I know that it was a rosary. She would have beads and pray them at her little dining room table with her Bible open.
Wow.
But nobody ever spent time, teaching me anything or telling me really.
Yeah. Did she speak much English, your grandmother?
She did, actually. She came over as a little girl, and with her sisters and her parents. And she learned English because she was a little girl when she came over.
How old were you when she passed away, roughly?
She passed away, I was 19. So I attempted suicide twice. My first attempted suicide was after the abortion, in between 18 and 19. And the people I was living with at the time helped save me, and I'm very grateful for that, although at the time I was very upset that had been done. I was in a very abusive relationship, and my parents saw that I had gotten terribly beaten, and he was put in jail, and my mom thought, he's going to kill her if he gets out, and so she helped arrange to send me across the country to one of her friends' houses in Northern California. And I was there, and I was depressed, and I didn't want to live, and I ended up swallowing all of the medications that these people were taking for whatever reason, high blood pressure, like all this stuff, and downing a half a bottle of whiskey. And I just remember doing that and started walking over to where my room was, and I blacked out. I don't remember anything. And then I have a quick flash before I remember being in the hospital scene. And I was laying on the living room floor, and the woman who I was living with was like over me, like slapping me across the face. And screaming at the top of her lungs, "Don't you do this to me. Jessica, wake up. Your mom, she's going to kill me." Like, like she was so scared, and just about everything, I had that flash of her doing that, and then I blacked out again, and then I woke up in the hospital. And
it wasn't an option that you could live with your grandmother?
No, she was very poor. She lived in a mobile home in a 55 and plus community. Oh. So she wasn't allowed to have anybody my age there. She would let me, every once in a while, she would let me sleep on her couch. And, say, "Oh, my granddaughter's visiting." But my dad was very protective of her, rightfully so, and didn't want her to be put out of where she lived. And I didn't want that either. She would beg me to stay. She would. She would have totally let me stay there. But, the idea of me being responsible for her not having a place to live was too great to bear. But, so she passed away when I was between 19 and 20. And when she passed away, that was when I lost all hope. Okay. She was the closest person to me, a part of how I felt about, like, I can get through this. Just kind of knowing that she was there in the background. She never judged me. She never told me what I had to do in order to show up at her house and be loved by her. She always prayed over me.
Did she grow up in Florida herself?
She actually grew up in New Jersey. In Jersey, and married up there. And then she worked in the factories as a little girl up there, and got really sick in her lungs and moved to Florida. The doctor's orders were, you need to go to the weather in Florida for your lungs, and ended up moving to Florida. And that's how she ended up in Florida.
Oh, wow. I know. I've got a friend of mine that he was homeless and on the streets and stuff, and he had a grandmother that wasn't Catholic. He's not Catholic; he's Protestant. But he told me once that she was he loved his grandmother, and she basically like prayed him into sobriety.
Yeah, I'm telling you, the prayers of grandparents, especially grandmothers, especially are just, and I know that that's, and I know that that's why a lot of, she saved my life. The second attempt at suicide, I had a very fast car. I had a Monte Carlo SS at the time. I don't even remember how I got the car. Somebody gave it to me. And it was 3:00 in the morning, and
Was this in the 80s?
This is now 92?
Oh, okay.
92, 93. Yes, 92. She passed in 92, and it was right after her passing. I got in my car, 3:00 in the morning. Don't want to live anymore. I've had enough. That's it. I've been through too much. Now that she's gone, no reason to stay. And so I just barreled down what's called Wiles Road. It was in the western side of like the Fort Lauderdale area. And it ended in the swamp, basically, because it's all built up now. But back then, it ended in the swamp. So it's like, okay, I'm going to drive it as fast as I can. And that car got up to 125, I think it was. And I'm going to just slam myself into something. And if I can't find the courage to do that, I'm going to just drive it off into the swamp and just kill myself. And
With
so
the alligators?
Yep. Yeah. Alligators, swamp, pitch dark.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I started at one side where it started at 441, and I just pedaled to the metal. There was nobody on the streets, not out in that area at that time. And got it up past 100 and was just crying and driving and no seatbelt on. What's the point? You know what I mean? And just crying and just ready to end it all. Just speeding down that road. And all of a sudden I heard my Nana's voice. And she'd already passed. Yeah. And she just said, everything's going to be okay. Right. Basically, don't do it. Like, everything is going to be okay. And, when I look back on it, I know God knew that was the only voice that I trusted at that time in my life. It was the only one. And he allowed me to hear it. And that's what stopped me. Her telling me everything was going to be okay. And I didn't know how it was going to be okay. But I just heard her say it, and so I believed it, and I trusted it. Yeah. And I stopped.
You think about how many of those mothers and grandmothers out there doing the heavy lifting in conversion and spiritual life. And, we really do. I mean, it is like, I think in our crisis of faith today, we don't recognize the power of prayer. And I think, catechism, I think, aptly speaks of the battle for prayer, even among those of us who are believers, priests. It's like, you got to spend time in prayer, right? We believe in a primacy of grace. And what is being done in these cloistered convents and these little ladies with the rosary.
My husband says it's what's literally keeping the world just combusting.
I think that's what Lucia said, like in the 80s, that nuclear war was prevented because of those, I guess, who did respond to the message of Fatima or the 5 First Saturdays. That's a testimony. But, all right, so you didn't go swimming with the gators. You decided
I did not. Thanks be to God.
What happened next?
Continued housing instability. There's a thing on the streets where you date men for resources. Some people consider it a form of prostitution. The women who do it don't, because they're usually not necessarily short-term relationships. I mean, you can
Yeah.
be in that relationship for years, actually. But you're doing it for a roof over your head, for resources, car to drive, food. So I was in quite a few of those relationships, hopping around in those. And then at 21, I was in one of those. Now I'm in Miami, and it was a really abusive one. I got pregnant again. So now this is my third pregnancy, and I'm 21. And so I have 5 months pregnant. He beat me down hard. It was a bad one. And I ended up getting thrown through a plate glass window and having to go to the hospital. And the nurse there was literally in tears, begging me to let her help me. And I was just numb. I was just a shell of a person sitting there. And she kept saying, he's going to kill you, and to me it was like, okay, I've already tried. I've been unsuccessful. Great.
Right.
And then she said something that triggered me. And she said, he's going to hurt your baby. And when she said that, I just was, no, this baby's coming home with me. Like, that was my overall feeling with this particular pregnancy was, I was forced to give this one up. And now I'm, not anywhere in his life. This one I killed. I pretty much had an abortion because I didn't want to bring it out to life on the streets. This one is coming home. I don't care how much abuse I have to suffer. I have a roof over my head, albeit not a very nice one, but it's there. And I have resources, and I have a place to bring this baby home to.
Right.
So, no, this baby's coming home with me. And that's why I let her help me. I didn't want anything to happen to this child that I was now pregnant with. And I would have done anything. Got a restraining order. He went to jail, pressed charges. He went to jail. The apartment was turned over into my name. Was on welfare. I got my rent relief check in the mail, and that paid the rent. I got my food stamps that put food in my refrigerator. I had, the medical insurance from the state that paid my prenatal visits and my hospital bill. And so I was set. And then I gave birth to my third child, my daughter, and brought her home in a donated car seat, in a taxi cab. And you would have knocked on my door back then and said, hey, Jess, how's your life? I would have told you that I had the best life ever because I was in that place with my child. And obviously, that's not the truth, right? Here I am, a domestic violence survivor, previously homeless, the truth of that, I had no idea.
Right.
I just wasn't aware, cognitive of I was living my best life to me.
Right.
Yep.
And you had enough resources? I mean, the food, the supplies for the babies and everything?
Oh, yeah.
Huh.
Oh, yeah.
So the system
government
worked.
did that. The system worked, yeah.
Wow.
And I share this with all the families we accompany, and I go out and I give talks about the system and where it is today and the reform that it needs, because I used the system exactly the way someone is supposed to use the system, and brought myself to a better place out of dependency on the system.
Right.
Now, some might say I was more intelligent and more resourceful than others are, and that's fine, but intelligence and resourcefulness is something you can learn.
Right. So did you ever return to the streets at that point? Or
No.
That was the end? Oh.
That was it for me.
Okay.
I mean, I did return to the streets in 1999, but it was in a completely different capacity.
Right.
Yeah,
right,
completely different. But I was called back out to the streets in 1999.
So you found work. What did you do?
I did. I mean, I was super intelligent, very resourceful.
Yeah.
attractive.
Uh-huh.
I was attractive as a young
Uh-huh.
woman, so I bartended.
Oh.
The state paid for daycare, so I would work during the day in like an office, and then my friends would watch my baby at night to
Oh.
go bartend.
Oh, wow.
Yep. Eventually bought a little beater car.
Yeah.
And even relocated back up to Fort Lauderdale, got a better job. Now I was an office manager in an office, much nicer apartment.
What are some positive life hacks you could tell us that you
Um,
learned from the streets?
okay, so, well, I can start with, I speak about this. Dissociative disorder is something that trauma victims experience, right? Especially sexual traumas, right? I disassociated.
Mm-hmm.
And you disassociate on the streets a lot. I personally believe that the longer you're on the streets and the longer you disassociate, that turns into mental illness and psychotic disorders. Mm-hmm. But that disassociating is kind of removing yourself from a situation emotionally. And
it's almost like a mindfulness that they talk
about. It is. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. So it's like it gives you the sense of control over your feelings and your emotions in a situation when it's mastered, when you've healed and can now tap into it and use it for good, because really that's all I've done. I'm extremely intuitive. Mm-hmm. And I credit that to constantly being aware of my surroundings and constantly being on guard. You learn people's movements, people's actions. You know, people will tend to. You learned, the patterns, right, that people do before they do something, and so you study in a sense people and their behaviors as a way to protect yourself.
Let me ask you this question. Sometimes you meet somebody that is, I don't know if the word sociopath, psychotic, I don't know, but it's like, you feel like they've got a facade up that looks perfectly fine, but there's something telling you that it's not all fine. And then it's not even like this unctuous, overly nice, but it's like they're kind of like, I don't know, you could read that too, like
totally. Totally. Yes. And even the 25 years encountering homeless, that we've done in LA, like I see it, and I even teach people about it. We give webinars so that people can understand the actions of the homeless person, why they're saying this, why they're doing this. And it's usually a response just to the encounters that they have on a daily basis. And to me, it's fascinating. Human behavior and anthropology, all that stuff is fascinating to me. History, I love that. I love all that stuff. But to help bring someone who hasn't had that experience into the insights and into the context of why the homeless do the things that they do. And we were all created to be the best version of ourselves. And for one reason or another, this person in this situation has been deformed from that purpose, right? The path has taken a different route. So for me, it's about going back and seeing how it got deformed, how it went in a different direction, and figuring out how to help that person in a healthy relationship heal from that, right? 76% of women who are homeless experience child sexual trauma. 76%. I was one of them. So it's like the woundedness occurs before the actual homelessness for the majority of us, right? And so when people say, oh, we need to solve homelessness, well, the center of homelessness is a person. It's not a policy or a house. We can solve those issues that are connected to homelessness. But at the center of homelessness is a person. And until we start looking at that person and having a relationship with them, a healthy one, hey, how long you been out here? Where's your family? What's it like? Where'd you grow up? Where's your mom and dad? Do you have siblings? Like, we do that in all of our other relationships when we meet people new for the first time. and we engage in a relationship with them.
Yeah.
But the situation that homeless people are in create a fear in people who don't understand it, so they won't even engage or interact.
We could be afraid of being manipulated.
Yeah, and you
Yeah.
will be if you don't understand,
Mhm.
because manipulation is that's a part of surviving on the streets.
Yeah.
Everything is a transaction.
Right.
Everything is. And the homeless are so used to being treated that way
Yeah.
that even when you do encounter them with an authenticity and wanting to be there for them and start a healthy relationship, you have to journey through breaking that down, breaking that transactional behavior down in them. It
Right.
takes us, the average timeline for us to break through with a particular homeless family, the heads of that family are usually between 2 to 3 years.
And then the kinds of things you do to break it down, what would that be?
Love.
Mhm.
Unconditional love with
So-
boundaries.
So that would be like financial support?
Financial support, resources, being there. We have a 24/7 text line. They can text anytime. Bailing them out of jail, picking them up off the side of the street after a bad drug deal or prostituting themselves all night. Just being there. No judgment. We understand what you're going through because we do.
Right.
Because
Right.
we know what that life is like.
Uh-huh.
And eventually they see that journey with them and they go, it takes time for them to look at you and go, oh yeah, you really don't want anything from me. And they have to process that.
But yeah, it seemed like a person's downtown, they see a homeless person. The homeless person is thinking that that guy who just got out of his nice car wants something from them? Is that?
If they come up to them, yes. No, the first thought that they're having is they're completely invisible to them.
Right.
Isolation and invisibility are the number one feelings of homelessness.
Yeah.
If you're encountered, then that encounter has to do with selfishness and transactions.
Okay.
What would this person want from me?
Right.
I'm nothing to them.
Right. Right.
Nobody encounters me unless they want something of me or from me or for me to do something for them.
Right. And what do you tell? I know this is like a shallow question, but like people. I mean, as a priest, I get, you're wearing a habit, and this has been international experience of like you get mobbed for money, handouts and stuff. Do you tell people not to give money out on the street or to give money? Because sometimes you feel like you're just feeding a drug habit or something,
Yeah. I think that each individual person has to make that decision based on their own relationship with God. I can't tell somebody whether or not they should give somebody $1 or $20 or anything. We went to the Alabama Theater last night for a show, and we were walking out, and there was a homeless guy sitting in the corner, and he stopped us. He's like, hey, can you buy me something to eat or something like that? And we couldn't because we had to be somewhere else. So we couldn't journey with him to the store and buy him something. But I had cash in my pocket. But I didn't answer him at first. I stuck my hand out and so that he can see I wanted to touch him, to shake his hand. And I said, my name's Jessica, what's yours? He was like, Thomas. And he just looked at me like, because that in itself, I came close to him. I wasn't like put off by him. I asked to touch him by putting my hand out for a handshake. And I looked into his eyes and I gave him something that wasn't money, that was much more personal, which is my name, which is the most personal thing about me, right? And so all of those things help to start to show that person that they're interacting not in a transactional way, that it's starting off relational. And he did. He lit up. He was like, he looked at me with like, you're different. I haven't experienced this before. And my husband told me, he's like, I'm so sorry we don't have any cash. And I was like, I think I have some. But as I'm kind of digging in my pocket, how long have you been out here? 7 years. Wow, that's a long time. And he just looked at me like, can't believe you asked me that, right? So here he is. You can tell by his reactions that he's invisible, right? His behavior shows me that the people who interact with him, which are usually just the other people in your situation, it's all transactional.
So you did wind up giving him some money?
I did. I couldn't see where my money was, so I knew I had a few bills in there. I didn't know what they were. Pulled out $1, and I was like, oh, I do want to give him more. $1 goes nowhere nowadays. That's like throwing pennies at somebody. I really felt bad. And I was like, well, and my husband was like, I think I see another one. And I pulled it out and it was a 20. And I was like, oh, luck of the draw tonight, buddy. And handed it to him. Yeah. And he grabbed my hand. He was like, God bless you. And I was like, God bless you. I was like, thank you, Thomas. It was awesome meeting you, and stay safe. That's it. That's it. You know, if I were to go out there today and I saw Thomas, he would remember me. Now, he'd probably remember me for giving him that 20, because that was a higher bill, but he would also connect it to how I interacted with him. You know? Those are the types of interactions that's what we do. We interact with our families on a consistent basis with them in that way until it slowly breaks them down and they start to build that trust, because they don't trust anybody. It's not safe. It's not safe to trust.
And you're in LA? You live in LA?
Yeah, in LA.
So you're going to like downtown Roosevelt?
Nope, I don't go downtown. I can tell you that right now. I have no shame in admitting that. That's a whole nother beast down there.
It's very dangerous.
Well, it is very dangerous. Unfortunately, the situation in Los Angeles with our law enforcement, a few years ago, they got defunded. And we lost a large portion of the police force, and they haven't been able to replace them. So enforcement in Los Angeles has been not good. And so we are experiencing an uptick in crimes, gang activity. Like, it's not a good situation. I also know the truth about the encampments downtown. They're very much gang run, because of where they are. And so I don't ever put myself in that situation, because my husband won't allow me to. He's nixed that idea for me. But truth be told, you know, what we talk about at Sophisa is the idea of, you know, subsidiarity, right? When I walk out my door and I look at my local community, that's where I should be looking for who's in need, right? Downtown is far from me. It's not my local community. I can drive there if I want. Take me 45 minutes, but I can drive there. But my local community is Westchester, California. My local park, my local schools, my local restaurants. And so we try and share the message to the local communities that this idea of subsidiarity, right? Look at where you are and help that person right next to you. And there's plenty of work in my local community. So that's where we stay.
You're working your way to downtown.
Yeah, I mean, eventually.
You speak of like the transactional and the manipulation and stuff. And I'm just like thinking the broader society, you know, some days I wake up and I include myself in this, but I just like, man, we're all crazy. It's like sometimes I feel like we're all on the spectrum. We're all like, and it's like, where's the line here? And it just, but because, you know, a lot of people feel unloved. A lot of people don't have connection. They might be living in a nice house and things. But so what do you think are like some fixes for like larger society, or like, what do you see, like the parallels from your experience on the street to nice suburbia America?
Yeah, absolutely. There are parallels, absolutely. The isolation and the loneliness, that's happening in our housed community as well. You know, technology, electronics, the phone, all of those things have isolated us. Even though we're in our homes and we have our jobs and we have all the resources we need, I do believe that as housed community members, we are suffering in very similar ways than the unhoused. because of the choices that we've made to be on the phone as much as we're on the phone, and all those are algorithms.
Yeah.
All of those, what we're getting on the phone are things that AI and all the technology has figured out that we like to see, right? That makes our pupils dilate pretty much. And so we've trapped ourselves.
It's like, it's like a fast food diet. I have a French friend who would literally cook fancy meals for groups of people and everything, and he would be criticizing the American diet. It's sugar and salt, quick stimulation. And it's like that quick stimulation in media, phone use, that we can't enjoy a richer meal, a richer relationship, a deeper relationship. It's like it becomes very on the surface of just sense experience. Right?
Yeah. And that's in the house community. In society in general, and I've shared this with my husband many a times, we've talked about this, what was on the street in my experience has now become the norm in society, where you would have to actually drive to a particular area and neighborhood in order to be exposed to certain cultural things. Where now I can go on social media and, the number one song in, let's say, rap, right? Those lyrics would have never been there 25 years ago, 35 years ago. You would have to go into a particular area, into a deepened culture in order to experience that. And that's been made just everywhere. So it's kind of what I see is I've seen that my street experience has leaked out into society as almost acceptable. Yeah. And I see that that's where society is going. What used to be just confined to this situation is now out there. Yeah. I can pull up a very popular rap song right now and show it to you. And if we were to compare that to 1992, the number one rap song, it's night and day.
And the rap song would have like a lot of lyrics, images that
you would only experience. That's the truth of the streets, not in common society. Right? Yeah. That's the change that I've seen. We've allowed that instead of kind of cornering it and either keeping it at bay or healing it. We've allowed it to become what's normal, what's acceptable now.
And I was on Twitter, like last year I've been on Twitter more just, I would follow like some sports stuff, some news stuff, and then it kind of gets bigger.
Right.
And there was some kind of concert and these women were dancing, and it was like, you could tell, I mean, it wasn't like really modest or anything. Their dress, wasn't very modest, but the movements and the gestures were like, it's like, it's just like, to me, it was just like this further coarsening of our culture, And so there was the big debate was there anything wrong with this? They're just having fun. They're just dancing. It was like, but I mean, when I looked at it, it was like, this is like, it's like we would not have been doing this 20 years ago, right?
No.
And there's something that's just like, I don't know what the word is. It's like, it just seems like it's the women in our coarsening culture. I think the women are losing a certain dignity in dress, behavior, and dancing, whatever. I don't know.
Well, that's what I think it is. I think it is that lack of human dignity and living out that dignity, because that's exactly what I'm talking about. So strip clubs, right? Definitely a part of the street experience, stripper poles, strip clubs, but it was taboo. It was separate from everyday life, right? And so now I can go in LA to a pole gym and it's a gym for women or whoever, who can go in, and it's literally just an exercise room with poles, and I can do a pole exercise as an exercise. Right? It's just it's this normalizing of this type of dysfunction and deformation of our dignity. And it's in the masses now.
Yeah.
Which is very disheartening for me, because when I escaped that life, I felt like I truly escaped it,
Yeah.
and that I left it there,
Yeah.
and then when I went back to it, it was in a completely different capacity, in a way I could kind of control.
Right.
And now it's everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's everywhere.
Well, that's like the feminism I grew up hearing about was speaking out against pornography, against sexualization of women, the way they dress and everything. And even today, sometimes I feel like, there's like some pushback in some Catholic circles about putting all this on the women. But sometimes I want to say, just coming from the dignity perspective, it's like, just for the sake of your own personal dignity, it's like, yeah, it's always on the man if he's lusting, right? That's his decision, so she's not responsible. I mean, there is a call to modesty just out of charity for your brothers or something. But, I think too, on the level of just your own dignity and self-worth, let's dress in a way that's just not reducing us to objects, right? And I just feel like that objectification is just happening. I don't know, just and all broader than dress and things. But the other thing too, I remember reading John Paul II about culture, and he talked about how culture grows up just naturally around the human person and the community of persons, of human beings. They get together and they develop a culture. And that culture develops to protect the person. And the problem today is that with, I don't know if it's technology or increase of wealth or whatever, that culture is changing so fast that, I don't know if the culture changes, but these things are changing so fast that a healthy culture can't keep up with it.
Yeah.
It can't keep up to protect children from getting online on their smartphones, in a serious way and stuff. It's like, and because I know, like my grandparents' generation, they got definite rules about dating, what you do, what you can't do, how the sexes interact, and you'd have dances and stuff, but all that was like, you follow these rules and stuff. And I remember as a kid listening to this stuff, I said, oh, you guys are so uptight. This is what I was thinking. You wouldn't dare tell them this, but I'm like thinking, that's so backward. We're free now, right?
Yeah, right? Oh, we're so free, right?
We're being crushed and pulverized.
Yes, right? Well, I mean, you said it, right? The whole protecting, right? Like, if there's no time, but, who is our great protector? That's God. God is our great protector. And the family was given to us to protect, right? The husband was given head of the household in this sense to protect his family. And the attack on the family is obvious. The attack on the family is obvious. I mean, every single homeless family that we encounter comes from a broken home. And that was my own experience. The intact family is not the norm of society anymore, and quite honestly hasn't been for a while now. And the repercussions of that, and then when you do have an intact family, the roles of husband and wife in an intact family are kind of confusing. Kind of confusing. And I'm not saying that, we have to fit into this cookie cutter mold of this is what a husband does and this is what a wife does and she has to stay home and cook. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is the desire of our hearts in the roles that God has given us. And I had to learn that myself, right? That I trust God by trusting my husband's leadership. But he earns that trust from me by trusting God in learning proper leadership, right? And I just feel like in the dynamic of the family, we've lost our true masculine and feminine geniuses, right? The true masculine genius isn't machismo. It's not overpowering women. It's not using women. The masculine genius is tender.
right.
and humble and meek and strong
Mm-hmm.
and fortifiable. The female genius is not, this, submissive to abuse and to be overtaken.
Mm-hmm.
It's, companionship
Yeah.
and nurturing and
Right.
receptivity.
Right.
Right? I think that our church has so many beautiful teachings, but we're in an age where the bishops really need to highlight what our society's ills specifically are right now and really expose those beautiful teachings that we have in a way so people can see something different than what they're actively experiencing. Because we're talking about now a couple generations of this that just don't know.
Yeah.
That don't know about the masculine and feminine
Yeah.
genius and what that
Yeah.
truly looks like and how that sets you free.
Right. Yeah, just to accept the complementarity between the sexes. It's like our secular culture completely rebels against that. And I mean, it's just rebelling against human nature itself now. It's like technology gives us ability to pretend that we can manipulate things and all this, but it's like it's written into our very DNA. And there's a mystery there. There's a wonderful mystery. I was just listening to a podcast with these two. They both had doctorates in theology and stuff, and they're just speaking of it like the male-female interaction and like why men can be priests and stuff. And they said it's going to take. There's a special challenge right now with the transgender movement, with the the LGBT movement and everything, to explain all of this. The church is teaching that the body has meaning, that there's an underlying spiritual revelation in our corporal bodies. It's something revelatory about the plan of God. And we all know that if we live that plan of God as Christians, we know this, it'll be a flourishing, it'll be a blessing. But it kind of, at one level, when I heard these guys struggling and saying it's going to take centuries or whatever, and I guess we'll never plummet completely, but it's like, well, the world's on fire. and they recognize the world's on fire, but it's like the challenge is not just it's everything. Right now, it just seems like the pushback on Christianity, the teaching of the church, everything is being challenged, right? And it's just impossible just to come up with some answer in the immediate thing that's satisfying to people.
But are we really showing the world what those teachings truly are in a way that they can process?
Right.
That's my challenge to the church, and especially the bishops, right? The youth today are under a completely different operating system than you and I and in the generations before us.
Yeah.
And, we have to learn where they're starting from and how they're processing things. And then we have to take what our churches always had and express it to them in a way that they can understand it and can apply it. I don't think we've done that.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think we have.
How would you describe where they're at today? Or where the young people are at today?
I think our young people are, I think that the majority of them are looking for authenticity. And they're looking for unity.
Yeah.
And they want something to fight for. And, the truth be told on how I feel is that if the church doesn't give them that, in the way in which they can see and process and understand it, then the enemy will.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're seeing.
Yeah. Now, do you give your husband, who's a deacon, preaching advice? Do you ever write a homily for him?
I have never written a homily. My husband and I have every morning what we call coffee time. We've had it our entire relationship. So 27 years of coffee time. Every morning we wake up when we're in the same city together. If one's traveling, we don't.
Has the coffee changed? Fancy espressos?
No.
Drip coffee?
In Lent, and sometimes if we give coffee up for Lent, it's tea. But it's that time together in the morning. It's at least a half hour, 45 minutes. Then
of just talking?
Just talking.
In this crazy, fast-paced world?
We give one another that time. Yeah, we wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning, so we get up early. We spend that time together, and then we pray the Liturgy of the Hours together, the morning office, and then we work out. We spend at least 20 to 30 minutes moving our bodies, and we do it together. And in those moments, we share a lot with one another. We talk about what's happening in the world, in the church, and all of those things. So do my opinions and what I have to share with him during coffee time affect what he preaches about? Definitely. But for the most part, I've never heard any of his homilies until the moment everybody else in the congregation hears them.
Okay.
So.
Well, I think too, maybe what we're talking about too. My brother's always telling me that too. You priests, bishops have not addressed his complaint is like the roles of women and men and family life and stuff. And he's single and he's been very frustrated with dating and things like that. But too, it seems like the most powerful thing is just the witness of the layperson's life and spreading the gospel, the witness of family life, the witness of fidelity and commitment and openness to life and raising. I mean, it seems like that just speaks a volume that you maybe is not even, it's just an example before people that maybe you can't even reduce to propositions,
Right.
But it's just, there's a depth there.
Yeah.
I come back to this. I'll preach to this a lot. I just mention it sometimes, but just like I saw witness in my family of caring for the sick or the elderly or, family members that are sick and dying and stuff. And just dealing with great loss, and how they did that. They stayed with their faith. They held their faith and stuff. And there's just so much there. It's like I keep coming back to that, just thinking of that example. It's like a well that you just can always draw water from. I'm not thinking what they told me or what they taught or things they said. I'm thinking like that witness of fidelity in difficult situations,
Well, I'm going to challenge you on that. How does the youth of today experience that witness?
I know, that's the problem.
That's what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
It's that witness is great, but if your witness is in a bubble,
right?
If it's only within here,
yeah.
And the ones who really need to be exposed to that witness is all the way over here.
Yeah.
How do we bring that together? Being in the world, not of it.
Yeah. And I find, my own preaching, I feel like it gets more and more simple. It's like I think about some of these issues and it's like so complex. It's like, how can I, to bring this up in the pulpit? I'm not, like the other day, yesterday we had the reading of the tree planted by the stream. Its leaves experiences change of season. Its leaves stay green. And I just said it, this is so simple. This couldn't be such a simpler message, but it's like we have a choice. If the roots of the tree go to the stream, it thrives. If it doesn't, it's like a lava wasteland of a barren. I forgot the phrases, but it's like it's like every day we have a choice. Either am I going to turn to God with these problems, these issues, and experience some life, or am I going to stay in my self-sufficiency, my own world?
Yes.
And so
the problem is that we don't have the trees planted right next to the stream anymore.
Yeah.
The trees are so far away from the stream, they don't even know the stream exists.
Yeah. They're both.
So who's going to pull the buckets up and walk them over and convince them to come on over because it's over here? That's my question.
We're both in our ghettos, the Catholics and the secularists.
Right?
But your own story, it's tough to tell me a story because I'm so ADD. I've got you all over the place. You're a Catholic.
It's a lot. I am a Catholic. I am a Catholic today, from an unchurched and then kind of anti-Catholic, at least some of the teachings. But yes, so after I got my life together, I was about 23 now, I met my now husband. I was working in that office. I was the office manager there. And I encountered him he was a copier salesman and our copy machine broke down. So our worlds collided, which I know was from the prayers of my Nana in heaven, because he had a completely different upbringing and was raised Catholic, both parents together, traveled the world with his family, very successful, college educated. Like, the fact that we were in the same room together was a miracle in itself. And so, yeah, I was mesmerized by him and intrigued and by his family, even seeing his parents together when I would go over to his house and holding hands, sitting at the dining room table, talking to one another. Like, I just didn't experience stuff like that. It was so foreign. But I was very attracted to it and very drawn to it. And so I knew I was, wherever he wanted to go, whatever he wanted to do, I was going to try and go with him. And luckily he felt the same way about me.
Otherwise you get a restraining order.
Right. And I am familiar with those. So yes. So no, we did. It was amazing. And we started dating. We moved from Florida to California and got married. And he adopted my daughter that I had at 21. And raised her, and we had 2 more sons in our sacrament of marriage. And he never pressured me. He never even asked me, why won't you be Catholic? I never brought it up. But he was raised what he would call a cultural Catholic. So he knew what to do, and he was faithful to his parents' relationship and what they taught him and the faith they passed on to him. And I think he did it more out of that obedience. So he went to Mass, not every Sunday. He would go to Mass every once in a while. We'd definitely go on Easter and Christmas. And we got married in the church. He was huge about that. He was like, we have to get married in the church. I was like, I don't care where I marry you. Like, Vegas, the church, same thing to me, right? And so...
An Elvis or priest, either one.
Right. But so I trusted him. He treated me tenderly. He loved me authentically, and I never experienced that type of love. And so I held on to it dearly and trusted him. And then I was living this, driving a minivan, have everything I need, have a wonderful husband who takes care of me and loves me tenderly, have more kids, living in suburbia. And it was chaotic inside, because here I am, my true identity I thought was I'm just some street kid from Fort Lauderdale, and I'm playing this role. And so I had an identity crisis, and really struggled with, well, who am I? And so that led me into therapy, secular therapy.
And I'm sorry, you're married, how long, right today, how long have you been married?
22 years now.
So this was like 10 years in the marriage, or?
We got married in 2002. This was about about 2 years into the marriage.
2 years.
2 years, because at first it was just him, I, and our daughter, my daughter that he adopted. So that was our little family. And it was, I didn't have to work. So first time I never went out and earned any money for myself to provide for myself. So everything was different. And I started secular therapy. And I ended up in secular therapy for 7 years. And it helped me a lot to identify my traumas, because when you're surrounded by trauma, you're usually surrounded by people with the same traumas. And so for me, that was just how life was. Like, this girl was also raped, and this boy also prostituted himself. Like, when you surround yourself with people who have the similar experiences to you, you don't really think that there's something abnormal about them. And so there was a discovery of, oh my gosh, like this shouldn't have happened and this was a bad thing. And so I went and struggled through that in therapy for 7 years. And I came out of therapy.
Is that like every week kind of therapy?
No, it was twice a month. Yep, twice a month. And there were some breaks, and I went through, I think it was 4. I went through a couple of them. So it was a process. But when I came out of my last therapist, it was like, all right, I'm good. I think I'm good. I'm healed. I feel better. I can cope. I'm not struggling too much inside. But there was something missing. And I did have anger. Still a lot of control issues and a lot of anger, like hatred. I would have dreams at night of setting the men on fire who hurt me, all of them. Literally setting them on fire and laughing as they like ran down the street on fire and then spitting on their graves. Like just, I wanted revenge. Now that I was in a place of strength, I wanted revenge. And that's what I was feeling. And that's not a peaceful place to be. And so I went searching for peace. I was looking for peace. And honestly, what Oprah promised me, like power. She said the power was in me and I was looking for it, right? I want the power and the peace.
At this point, are you going to Mass with your husband?
No.
Oh. But he was going to Mass?
Yeah, he would go randomly.
Okay.
And his brother, he has one brother who is now a Benedictine monk and priest. But he wasn't back then. He was the director of music at a parish. And so he would go there to Mass there. And every once in a while I would go, but I wouldn't pay attention. I was literally going to see the family member that was there.
Right.
But so no, and he never, and I started, reading about Eastern religions and meditation and started putting, the salt crystals and all those things up, meditating, convincing myself I can reach, nirvana, and that's where that would be, that peace that I was looking for. And I was actually meditating at a New Age temple, a self-realization temple down at the lake, because that's where I would go to meditate. And their temple was at the top of the hill, and it had a gold top. And I was closing my eyes meditating.
In LA, there's no shortage of these places.
No. And this was Malibu, right? So I'm like totally in it. Yep, and it's like lake, pond. Yeah, and it's funny because my eyes were closed and I was meditating and I saw light shining through my eyelids, like it was like a glare. And so I opened it, and it was the top of the dome of the temple. And I was like, oh, I've never been in there before. I'm going to go check it out. And so I climbed up the hill, opened it. It was like shaped like a hexagon. And on the back wall were these huge tapestries of all the prophets that they worshipped. And right in the center was Jesus. And I immediately was like, what are you doing here? Right? That's what I thought. And then as soon as I thought that, like my whole being filled. And I had a mystical experience. He came out of the tapestry and was present. It wasn't a hologram. It was legitimately him coming out of this tapestry. And it was like a heaviness that drew me to my knees. But it wasn't a heaviness that was like a bad heaviness. It was just every ounce of me was completely filled. And it felt good. And I couldn't say anything. And he just looked at me and he was like, hello, welcome. I'm glad you're here. He said, I see you've met my friends, but you're searching for me. I'm the one you're looking for, is what he said to me.
Now this was part of the New Age Malibu thing. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
His tapestry was right up there with Gandhi and Paramahansa Yogananda and all of the other prophets that they worshipped. They saw him as a prophet.
Okay.
Yep. And he made it clear that he was not just a prophet to me that day.
Right.
And right after he said that, he was gone. And I was
And you physically saw him?
Yes.
What did he look like? The tapestry? Or did he look
just like the tapestry, but real?
Oh wow!
Yeah, it was unbelievable. It was life-changing, literally. Like, everything that I was searching for, I had an answer to. I knew it. Like, that was it. He was the answer.
I'm just thinking of like you rubbing the Sacred Heart of Jesus.
Yeah.
It's almost like a fulfillment, a yearning.
Oh, I
Is
never
it?
thought about that. It made me cry now.
I think too, when you first told that about being a child, it's just how consoling to him. I mean, knowing your journey, your walk, your sufferings, all that.
Yeah.
What a consolation to him. But anyway. So what did you do next?
I went home and took all my New Age stuff down. And what was in my mind to put up was a crucifix. That's all I knew, is that I had to put up a crucifix in my house. I don't know why. That was what I felt that I needed to do in order to find him. The first thought that I had was I heard my mother-in-law's voice. Every time I drove in a car by a Catholic church with her, she would be like, Jessica, do the sign of the cross, and I'd be like, okay, why are we doing this? It's my mother-in-law, so I'm going to please her, right? But it's like, why are we doing this? And she would always say, because Jesus is in there. And so that's what I heard after I had that experience, was my mother-in-law saying, Jesus is in there. And so I knew I had to go to the Catholic Church. That's where he is. I need to go find him there, because I wanted that again. That experience I was longing for again. And so I started going to Mass with my husband and the kids, and just started asking a gazillion questions. Why is he wearing a green dress? What's the cookie? Why is there a beheaded person in the window, right? What's going on here? What is all this? Which was good for him, because he was a cultural Catholic. He didn't have any of the answers. And so my conversion led to his reversion. And so he didn't like not having the answers. And so when I started asking questions, he wanted the answers. So he would go and he would study. He'd go to catholicanswers.com and listen to podcasts, and he just started learning everything just so that he would have an answer for me when I asked. But it took about 3 years. Yeah.
And you entered RCIA and...
Nope. I had what we call the fast track. You ever been to Disney?
The $200 pass.
I got fast tracked. Yeah, it was honestly, it was not a good formation. I thank God for it, because it worked.
Yeah.
God used it, right? But I was fast tracked into receiving my sacraments and coming into the church. The director of religious education at the parish, very sweet woman, but just did not do things in the proper order. And she was like, you need to be a Catholic, and I'm going to get the Father to get all your sacraments. And so it was a rush job. But
what was that like, being baptized?
So apparently I found out from my parents that before they divorced, they were Christians. Like Protestant Christians, and like really deep in their Christianity. So my brother Chris, his name is Christian, my older brother, and I was baptized, apparently in, I think, a bathtub in some like warehouse church, I think.
Wow.
I'm not sure. So I was conditionally baptized, just in case. The first one didn't take. And then I was brought in for, then I went to my first confession. It was a whole, I didn't believe in confession. You have to understand, like, I just had this one-on-one experience with Jesus. Right. So now you're telling me in order to have that, I've got to have this guy here. So I wasn't down for it, but I knew I had to do it. Right. So I did, but I went into that confessional, my heart wasn't in it. Yeah. And the oldest priest I've ever experienced was on the other side of the screen, and I couldn't hear anything that he said. And I got very frustrated. My heart got very hard. And I just kept saying to myself, see, I knew I shouldn't have done this.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but my sponsor taught me the logistics of everything. And she told me that, when you say you're sorry, then he's going to raise his hand. And when he does that, that's when Jesus forgives you of everything and everything's forgotten and you're all good now. So I was really looking forward to that part. And he did. He spoke and did this whole thing after I said my sins, didn't hear a word he said, super upset. And then I say I'm sorry. And then he goes to do the absolution. I see his hand go up and I do the sign of the cross. And at the sign of the cross, I had knowledge of everything that he had said. And I had a desire in my heart of the truth of that sacrament. Like it was like everything that I didn't know and was frustrated about was now infused in my mind and my heart. And so to me, it was like, oh, there he is again. This is amazing. Like, okay, oh my gosh, great, right? And I burst out of there just on first fervor like nobody's business, right? Like, yes. And he has been miraculous with me in my confessions. He really has. Lots of great experiences and life-changing experiences in confession. So I had my first confession, and then the next day it was Pentecost Sunday, Mother's Day. I received my first Holy Communion and my confirmation.
Describe your experience with the Eucharist again when you received
it. So that is what I was looking forward to, but really because I desired the unity in my family. My husband and my children were all Catholic, and I come from a broken, family coming up. So the idea that we were all in unity together in this faith was a driving force for me and what I was looking forward to the most. I didn't have very good formation, so the idea that, oh, this is Jesus Christ in the Eucharist wasn't there yet. But this idea that we were all one as a family in this was the most important thing for me, and it just felt amazing. It was a fullness for me.
And then did you go on to study yourself different? Were you a reader?
Yes, I read lots of books, but I was also raising a young family at the time, so you don't get much time to read. I registered twice, once at St. Thomas University online to try and get through and try and get a degree. I never walked across a stage because I got my GED. So I thought, I want to walk across a stage and see how that feels. I still haven't. It still never worked out for me. And then I stopped going to take care of my household. And then I signed up again for online classes at Holy Apostles College online, and learned a lot there. Took courses there. But eventually didn't have time to continue, so never actually. And then I was in diaconate formation with my husband for 5 years.
Wow.
So there was a lot of...
You would go to those classes?
Well, so in Los Angeles, it's 5 years, and the wife is required to attend with the husband, and it's every other Saturday plus 2 retreats a year. Like I think it's 3-day retreats.
So they weren't online classes, they were...
No, they were in person. And in LA, it could be an hour and a half away because it's a huge archdiocese. And so it was for the entire archdiocese. So in our archdiocese, there's 5 regions. And this was the diaconate formation program for all of the regions. So that would be in different areas.
So... that must have been hard with a family.
Yeah. There was an age gap between, obviously, my daughter that I had that my husband adopted and raised, and our 2 sons that we had in our marriage. So it was a 10-year age gap between our daughter and our first son together. And so she took care of them a lot while we were gone on Saturdays. That's actually one of the things that I would give feedback to if ever asked.
Now's your chance.
Is that, well, a couple things about the diaconate that I noticed that I do have feedback with. One is we were the youngest couple. And, you know, when we did our research, my husband specifically, on ages and ordination and the diaconate, in all the church documents, it says that 35 is the minimum age you can be ordained, I believe, to be a permanent deacon. And it just seemed like everybody there was in their 60s and 70s. So we kind of felt out of place. Like, wait, is this something for people our age? So we struggled a little bit with that. I would say that our church as a whole has fallen into a particular rhythm with the permanent diaconate in a particular age group that I think that we need to rethink. There's this idea that God can't call a young man with a family into diaconal service.
Right.
It just seems a little crazy to me, you know, because God does the impossible. And because of that, the program wasn't very family oriented. So our children did feel a separation from us and not a part of the experience. No matter how much we came home and told them about it, it just wasn't the same as if, you know, there were something there that helped bring families together in this formation.
Because basically, you're gone all day Saturday, twice a month.
For 5 years.
And all throughout the summer?
No, summers we had breaks.
Okay.
Yes, summers we had breaks. But yeah, it's a lot, you know, and our kids were, you know, our sons, our two bottom sons were, gosh, what was that? 12, like 10 and 8 at the time. So, you know, that's prime, I want my dad age, especially for boys.
Right,
you know, we missed a lot of soccer games and stuff. So yeah, that would be my feedback there, is that we should be more flexible and in our programs, in our formation programs for permanent, for men, especially married men who are at a younger age, who are hearing that call that they're trying to get confirmed by the church.
And were you all there when Bishop Barron was there? Because I remember hearing.
Yes.
Did he work with the diaconate program?
He actually, my husband was ordained in 2017.
Okay.
So we came out of the program right around the time that he came in.
Okay.
But we did hear of him becoming actively involved in the curriculum, most especially, which honestly needed it. Yeah, it needed it. I could tell it had been a long time since that was looked at and reviewed and examined. So, but I mean, overall, it was an experience that drew my husband and I closer together.
And how did y'all discern that? What was that? What was the draw for him or for you? Because you have to say yes too, right?
I do. I have to sign a paper, like literally sign it and state it and have it forever recorded that I agreed to this. No, I mean, when he, when you understand the dynamic of my husband and my relationship, it's literally, you know, I follow him wherever he goes. And that is a huge thing for someone like me and what I've experienced to say and do, just to be a follower, right? But that's what I am with my husband. I know that he's leading me straight to heaven. And so I trust him that that's what he's doing. So when he said that he was thinking about this, to me, it was like, oh, okay, sure. I had no idea what it entailed. I had no idea what the commitment was. It was just, okay, this is just some Catholic thing that he's doing. And it's a part of being Catholic. And he talked about it a few times in coffee time. And then he was on a business trip in New York. And I saw in one of my emails an email that said, are you interested in the permanent diaconate? come to an info day with the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. And so I took a picture of it and I texted it to him and I put question mark, right? Because he'd been talking about it and then he stopped talking about it and talking about it and he stopped talking about it. I was like, oh, I'm just going to put this on his radar and see if he wants it. Well, he had been coming out of St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York, out of daily mass, and he was just asking God, what are you calling me to do? And turned on his phone and saw my text with this information. And he felt like that was an answer from God. He's calling me to explore this and to see if this is where he's calling us to.
And his own, like, being brought back before the calling into the church was through, like, teaching you about or answering your questions?
Yeah.
So it just kind of snowballed in his life?
It did. Yeah. It did. And I think he saw in my answers his own answers. Like, I think he realized that he had the same questions. And so he was doing it to answer me, but in the end it was answering his own questions that he didn't even know to ask himself because he was stuck in that rhythm of just doing it culturally. Right. And it made sense to him. I mean, he loves to read as well. I think my husband has a gift of communication. He knows how to read something and then share it with somebody in a way where they're like, oh yeah, I get that. If I would have read what he read, I wouldn't have understood anything. But he turns and kind of translates things in this way that's what I was constantly doing. Right. And he does that with everybody he communicates with that I see. He does have that gift to share the faith in a way that it's accessible to people on their level, wherever they are.
Right. And so then when you founded Sophisa, and tell us about that. How did that come about?
I founded that when we moved to California in 1999. Oh. Okay. Yeah, I wasn't Catholic, wasn't interested in being like nothing. We just moved to California. We were actually coming out of Mass. We went to Sunday Mass and we drove by a park with the homeless in it. Mm-hmm. And I heard, a voice say, go back out there. And my initial response was, ooh, no. I'm not going out there. No. That's not for me anymore. Look at this I'm with this gorgeous man and we're in this beautiful state, driving in this lovely BMW. I am not doing that. And so I shut that voice out. Did you actually lock the door? Right? I didn't. I should have, right? Oh, that's funny. No, but it happened again over a course of 3 times. And it happened every time we came out of Mass. And we didn't go to Mass every Sunday, so it was sporadically. Yeah. The second time we came out of Mass, drove by, heard it again, but this time much firmer. Mm-hmm. Go back out there, almost like I was being scolded. I was like, so I stopped to think about, what is this? Where is this coming from? Should I be taking this seriously, this feeling, this thought? Mm-hmm. But then, no, I'm good. It's fine. We'll just put that over there to the side. And then it happened the third time. And it was a softer voice, and it said, go back out there. You know what that feels like. Just go be their friend. Mm-hmm. And that got me. Mm-hmm. I told my husband I wanted to go out and feed the homeless and talk to the homeless in the park. And he, of course, was like, what? Mm-hmm. And then he was like, all right, well, I'm going with you because I don't want you going out there by yourself. And so he came with me, and I took socks and chocolate chip cookies, and I sat down next to my first homeless person out there, and his name was John, and he was rewriting the Bible, by the way. I was like, okay, I'm not sure that needs to be done, but that's okay. You do you, right? And just started a conversation with him and realized, this is where I belonged. Mm-hmm. in this capacity, right? On the other side, in a sense.
Right.
And I went to each one of them and passed out what I had and thanked them for talking with me and wanted to know what they needed and like, what do you, if you could have anything right now, what would it be? That's what I would ask them. And then I would just go work on trying to get those things. And I would just go out there periodically, and then my friends found out that I was doing it, and some of them would come out, or they would donate. They'd give me stuff to take out there. And we did that for 7 years. 7 years we did that. And then we encountered a homeless mom and her 9-month-old baby. And they were living in the alley of a hotel. But the hotel night manager noticed them on the cameras and let them come in and sleep in the corner of the lobby from like 1 o'clock to 5 o'clock in the middle of the night because he felt bad for them. 9-month-old baby. And he did that for a couple nights, and he was like, I can't keep doing this, you know. So there was a Protestant church right across the street from the hotel, and he went over there one day and said, hey, there's this, can you please help her? And so one of the ministers from there went over and engaged with her and started a relationship with her and found out that she felt that her baby was sick. And so the woman from the church took her and her baby to the emergency room, and that's where I encountered them. So that same night, our littlest one was jumping on our bed and fell off and hit his head on our nightstand. And I told my husband, I was like, it's nighttime. I don't want him going to sleep. What if he doesn't wake up? What if he has a concussion? Like, I would feel better if we just scanned him. And they told me everything was okay. And so he's like, all right, let's go to the ER and get a scan. So we went to the emergency room that night. And we're sitting in there waiting for our son to be seen. And I hear this man screaming, like at the top of his lungs. And he's saying, you're wasting my time, you people, like just really derogatory stuff. And I'm shocked. I honestly thought they were filming a movie in the hospital, the stuff I was hearing. And I walked out to where the door was to look out the hall, and this man in a doctor's coat storms out of this room, like right by me. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And I turn and I look, and at the door was this this tall black woman who was from the church, and this very short Hispanic woman holding her little Hispanic baby. And they're both in tears, both of them just crying. And my heart was wrenched. I was just like, is everything okay? Like, what was that? Like, what happened? And the woman from the church said, well, she thinks her baby's sick. He hasn't gone to the bathroom in almost a week. And she's looking for help from him. And the doctor got upset, saying that all he needs is a laxative, and we can find that at CVS, the drugstore, and left. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, no. Like, but I knew it was true because I just heard it all. Right. And so I gave the woman my number from the church. I said, I'm going to go home. I have boys. I have baby boys. I'm going to go home. I'm going to get all my stuff together. You know, the woman was like, oh, she's homeless. And she was saying that. So I was like, I'm going to get all my stuff together. Please bring her to my house so that I can give you this. I have prune juice. I have baby laxatives. I have everything. Just bring her. She was like, okay, I'll talk to her. The woman wasn't even looking up. She was like this. She was down, just holding her baby. And so I went home and got all the stuff together and put it by the door, and hours went by. Hours went by, and looked at my husband, and I was like, they're not coming. And he was like, probably not. But you tried, you know. And as soon as I get ready to go to bed, my doorbell rings. And I go to the door. It's like 11:30 at night. And it's the woman from the church standing at my door. And I'm like, oh, you came. I was like, I was like, where is she? She's like, well, she doesn't want to get out of the van, the church van. Can you bring your stuff down to her? And I was like, absolutely. So I go down, and the woman's sitting in the van. She's holding her baby. She's not even looking up at me. Just eyes down, nothing. And I tried to talk to her, and I just looked at the church woman, and I was like, is she okay? Like, does she need any more help than what you're saying? She's like, she pulled me over to the side. She's like, so here's what's happened to her. She lives in Northern California, and her husband tried to kill her. Literally took a gun out to shoot her because they got into an argument. She grabbed her baby and ran out of the house, literally with no clothes on her back. She thought she can go to somebody's house. That person didn't turn up being there to help her. And so she contacted friends down here in Los Angeles and said, I have nowhere to go. I can't go back. He's going to kill us. And they said, okay, come down here. So they got her a train ticket. Her and the baby came down here. She stayed with them for like a week, and then they said she couldn't stay there anymore. So now she didn't have a place to live. So apparently she encountered somebody while she was on the street who could give her a job. And the job was cleaning office buildings at night. It was like, you can bring your baby there, because nobody's going to be there. You can clean and you can make some money. And so she took that job. And I'm not sure how long she was working there, but one night she was gang raped in front of her baby while working there. And her baby experienced the trauma and his gastrointestinal system just stopped working, I think from the stress of the trauma. And it had been about a week since it had happened. She was a shell of a woman, like just a shell, and it killed me. And seeing her with that baby triggered me. It made me think about having my first child and not being able to keep him. What happened to my second child, how I finally was able to take... the idea of this woman losing her child and having had this experience and anything bad happening or them getting separated or CPS coming and taking him from her, like, it just killed me. And so I told my husband, I said, we have to help. Like, there's children out there. Like, I was being triggered to remember what I knew about the experience of children in those scenarios. And now I was in a position to do something. And so I told him, I said, well, I want to formalize what we've been doing, serving the homeless. Let's find people who will get on a board. Let's form it. And so we did. We became a 501c3 charity.
And that particular woman, what happened to her?
It's awesome, actually. That boy is in college right now. Her and the church woman had such a great relationship that she found housing through that church, and she worked for the church woman as kind of like her assistant, and just went everywhere with her as like her guide in a sense, and she became our first Sophisa family who we encountered and registered with us. And so we decided to throw a Christmas party for her and the church woman. When I told the church woman, I can't believe that this woman's going through this, she's like, she's not the only one. Like, there's lots of families like this. And I told her, I said, no. She's like, yeah. I was like, where? She's like, I'll show you. I went on, it took us 2 months. I went in her van for 2 months after meeting that one mom, and she took me everywhere and showed me all the families that were in need. And that's when I was, no, we have to do something. So we did a Christmas party for 13 kids that first year. It was our first Christmas of hope. I made a big pot of spaghetti, and we got friends to donate. We asked the kids what they wanted. That's our thing. Give us your Christmas list. And we went out, we found at least one thing that they wanted from their Christmas list. I hired a professional Santa, like a real life Santa, to come, and we had Christmas with them. Kids of prostitutes, kids living alone in their parents' cars while they're on drug bin, like kids from the lowest circumstance that you can ever imagine were there, and we were having Christmas with them. And I told my husband, I was like, yeah, this is what I feel we're called to do. And so that's how it started.
So you formed the nonprofit, and And what do you do today? What is the outreaches that you do today?
So we have an outreach program where if a family registers with us, we'll give them, if they need shelter, we'll give them 3 to 5 nights in a motel, meet all their emergency needs, food, clothing, toiletries, gas, a lot of times phone bill payments, bill payment situation. But we do that as a way to engage in the relationship, because for us, it's about relationship. But we do that outreach and connect them to resources. We have housing, but our housing isn't, a 110 unit complex. It's a single family residence on a lot that we're building 2 more units on. But we have 2 families in our housing right now. We're always open for people to donate more housing for us, because we accompany 93 families. Yep, right now. We have a 24-hour Sophisa text line for our families to always have somebody to communicate with and be there for them and whatever they need. When we encounter them, we tell them we're not always going to be able to get you in housing or provide you with what you need at the moment, but we'll always be there for you. And when we do get the resources, we'll provide them as they come in. That, we tell them it's like we're journeying along with you in this whole process. So that's how we accompany homeless families.
Now you mentioned a webinar before that you all had.
Yes, and that is, so that's the other thing we do. So we created a webinar to help educate the local community, any but churches, groups, businesses, business owners. A lot of local business owners deal with the homeless. And so, we always get the same questions when people contact us, right? One of them is, do I give the guy $1? That's always a popular question. Right? And, so what we do is we do a webinar that helps break the myths around homelessness, right? We break down the mythology around homelessness and educate people on what that experience is really like so that they can be more empathetic and understanding. Because what we've found is there's a huge divide between the housed and the unhoused in a local community. There's a big gap in between there. They're not connecting with one another in a healthy way. If there's any connection at all, it's usually, get them out of here, I don't want to see them, or invisibility.
Right.
So what we feel that we're called to do is create the middle ground. So it's a safe and healthy place for these 2 demographics of people to come into a relationship with one another.
And practically, what would the middle ground be?
Honestly, we're still a secular organization, but we run it with Catholic principles. But honestly, that middle ground is the church. That's the truth. It's the church. Yeah.
So, like practically, you mean like inviting a homeless person to the church?
Well, I mean, I'm not someone who says, oh, you need to go out and take a homeless person into your home, because I don't know your home. I don't know your background. Right. I don't know your circumstances. So I could never tell anybody or advise anybody to do that. What I do tell people is, if you feel you're being called to engage in that way, then educate yourself. Right? You take an exam to get your driver's license. Like, you go through some type of education in anything else that you decide to begin, right? So that's what we want people to do. Oh, you want to do something about homelessness? Great. Come to the webinar, go to this other group's discussion on homeless, like learn about it. But for us, it's learn about the person. And why they're having the behaviors that they're having, so that you can understand the situation that you feel you're called to begin. Right. It's a relationship, and honestly, it's an unhealthy relationship in the beginning. So people need to be able to wade through those waters in a healthy way.
Yeah, because like what you mentioned before, you're walking into a situation where they're very maybe highly manipulative, and so you don't have good boundaries, and
Yeah, I mean, when I met my husband, I lied to him about everything. I lied to everybody I met because I didn't want to give people the truth, because the truth was only for people I trusted That way I could guarantee it couldn't be used against me or to harm me in any way.
Right.
Because when you tell someone the truth about yourself, you're acting in a sense of vulnerability, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that doesn't happen on the streets.
Right.
So, that is what you're getting. When you encounter a homeless person for the first time, it's almost guaranteed. There is a 90% chance that the truth is somewhere in what they're saying, but what they're telling you is just not true.
Right.
It's not.
Right.
And it's a defense mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
It's something you have to earn. It's something you have to, create a trust to deserve. And that's just the way it is based on the situations that they've encountered.
Right. And then with your own healing, therapy took you so far, then you got into the faith. And was there things you did practicing your faith that was healing for you, and maybe, not doing these same repeating destructive behaviors or something that really helped you in the faith? Or what was that healing like in the faith, I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah, I mean, it's the first time I've ever heard the words human dignity was after I became a Catholic. And that was a teaching that's just foundational for me. I mean, honestly, it should be foundational for everybody. But for me, it was this idea that I was made in God's image, right? That was so profound to me, that I was kind of like this little piece of God, right? That's how I saw that. That's how I interpreted that. So I am this little piece of God here in the world. And once I learned that, then my relationship with God just got so much deeper, and I just fell so much more in love with Him in the sacraments. But then I realized that if that were true for me, then that's got to be true for everybody. Mm-hmm. And that reality hit me, where it's like, am I living a Christian life that reflects that that's true for everybody I encounter? Mm-hmm. And that's where, my struggle with the hatred of the people, my enemies, pretty much, the enemies that I created in my heart. And so the sacrament of confession was huge for me. I went to a conference one time, and they were having confession in the back wall, and I told my husband, I'm going to go have confession. He's like, okay. And I get back there, and it's open. You can see all the chairs and everybody going back there. And it was a young Benedictine priest, and I sat in front of him, and I just unloaded. I unloaded all my hate, and I unloaded just the ideas like I just got to be a terrible person because I can't apply this dignity thing to everybody, right? And I don't.
Like 2 years ordained.
Right. Well, let me tell you something. It was definitely Jesus there, no matter how long he'd been ordained, because man, did he give it to me that I'm speaking about it over and over again now. But I shared that with him, and he looked at me, and he said, "Do you love them?" Speaking of my enemies. And when he said that, I was like, are you kidding? Like, I just told you. I gave you every reason why I hate them. Like, and in the world, completely justifiable. And you looked at me and said, do I love them? That's what I was thinking on the inside. But I looked into his eyes, and I saw Jesus again. It was Jesus's eyes. I knew it was Jesus asking me that question. And I knew that the answer should be yes, but that it was no. And I said, no, I don't. And he didn't stop. He looked at me and he said, do you want to see them in heaven? Whew. Again, it was Jesus asking me. And again, the answer was no. And I felt I am supposed to be saying yes. That's my answer. The answer should be yes, but it's not. And I said to him, Father, how do I do that? How do I get there? What's the answer? And he looked at me and he said, you pray. And that was the most disappointing answer I thought I'd ever heard.
It's always the safe answer.
I'm looking for checklists, give me like 10 Hail Marys, a full rosary, like rocks under the knee, like something, right? And just pray. Every time I have a flashback, I have a negative thought. Every time I have a bad dream, every time I envision that hatred or I feel that hatred welling up, to rebuke it and to send it to the foot of the cross where it belongs, and to ask God to love them like he loves them. And I said, okay. I said, okay. And I didn't mean it. Honestly, I didn't. But I was going to daily mass at that time.
I could see too how it'd be such a temptation or easy to say, what do you don't know anything about my life, priest. How can you speak into this reality that I've lived?
Yep.
But
and he did.
Yeah. It's like, to me, you're like a textbook witness of like the fruits of the sacraments. Every time you go, the sacrament of holy orders, sacrament of...
Yes, I'm telling you, it's my biggest message to people. And people are always like, well, what's your advice? Sacraments.
Yeah.
They're life-changing. They are the gifts from God to us.
Right.
And I always tell people, because I have lots of Protestant family and friends, right? Mm-hmm. I always tell them, it's like, you wake up on Christmas morning, right? Imagine yourself as a little kid. You wake up on Christmas morning, you go out to the Christmas tree. Do you ever go there, and take like 2 or 3 of your gifts and turn around and hand them back to your parents?
Right.
No. Jesus is standing in front of the Christmas tree with a basket of 7 gifts for you, right?
Right.
And you're going to pick and choose? No, you would never do that in any other case, right? Those are the gifts.
Yeah.
That is the way, profoundly, to the end, right? So that is what I share. But I started praying at daily mass. After I received communion, I would pray. I'd offer my communion for their forgiveness. And honestly, my heart was cold, and I was doing it just like this. At first I couldn't even get the words out. It was just, all right, God, you know why I'm here. It was just so hard. And it took about 3 years. 3 years. I remember the moment it happened. It was a moment for me. I received communion. I knelt down, and I was about to go into my regular prayers, and I started to cry. And I was weeping out of sorrow, the idea that I was too late, that my forgiveness was too late, and I thought about something bad having happened to them, my enemies, just as if it were happening to my husband or my children. And I was crying, and I was like, oh no, no, Lord, don't let it be too late. And then I realized what I was doing. Mm-hmm. I was loving them. And then I realized that he did it. There was no ounce, and there still isn't. There still isn't. There's no ounce of hatred of anything. It's the opposite. It's great love. I absolutely want to see them in heaven. I want to clap. I want to rejoice. I want to... What I tell people is that's perfect forgiveness, right? When the wounded and the wounder are both reconciled to God. Mm-hmm. Both of them. Who has the greatest power in reconciling an enemy to God? The wounded. That's what I believe. Mm-hmm. Somebody can be praying, oh, I pray for all the rapists out there that they don't rape anymore. Yeah, okay. That's beautiful. Keep praying it. Lord, I pray for my rapist. I pray for him. I pray that I'm not too late. I pray that you heal all of his woundedness and that you bring him into your velvety sacred heart. That's what I pray for. That's the desire of my heart. That was it. And he did it. He straight up did it. And it's been the most freeing experience of my life to not have the weight of those shackles anymore. It's true freedom.
And you would define forgiveness as, how would you define forgiveness?
Forgiveness, acceptance, surrender, peace, trust, love, Jesus, God. Yeah.
Well, you know, the other great theme here, it's like when you were told when you founded Sophisa at the beginning of it, I guess, just go and be their friend, right? And that there speaks of dignity. Okay, they're human beings, they have dignity. I can have a friendship with them. Jesus tells us, right, in the Gospels, I no longer call you servants, but friends. That I remember Benedict came out preaching about the friendship, and at first I thinking that, I don't know, I guess I didn't really think about it in the scriptures as much, but it sounded kind of like not enough, did that?
Yeah, we seem to do that a lot. That's just not enough, is it?
Right. But
it takes a mustard seed.
Yeah.
A mustard seed is enough.
Yeah, well, this call to friendship with Jesus, friendship with others, that's really a deep life, a deeply lived life. And so that's a beautiful story of healing. And I was just thinking, we covered, is there anything else we should cover?
I think this is the most in-depth.
Oh, I do have one more question.
Okay. One I've ever done.
The controlling piece. How did you get over that one?
Oh, yeah. Whew. Yeah. My husband nicknamed me Jessica Master Planner Echeverry. It was so bad. Yeah. Like, I just had to have control of everything. It's a trauma response. Definitely identified it in therapy, but didn't realize how much it was destroying its self-sabotaging behavior until I became a Catholic and started learning about, all the beautiful teachings of the church, especially feminine genius. The part we didn't discuss on here is that there were a few years when I was on the street where I was in same-sex attraction and only had relationships with women. It was about 2.5 years out there, and I haven't spoken a lot about that time, but the deformity of my child's sexual trauma sent me in a direction where my feminine genius wasn't known or understood. And so when I became a Catholic, God began revealing to me what it meant to be feminine. And how that was complementary to the masculine. And so, and in my marriage, I had to have control of everything. And God bless my husband. He was very patient with me. He never yelled at me, never got angry. He would get frustrated, but he would always give in, which probably doesn't sound like was a good thing on his part. But you could say his patience paid off because God eventually revealed in me what my true feminine genius was and is, and how the male-female complement one another and what those traits are in order for that complementarity to actually happen authentically. And so, and I needed that. I needed that in my life. I was very hard, very stern, very bossy, very controlling. And when I look back on it, it was a jail cell. It was literally a jail cell.
So what really helped you to break out of that?
Just living the faith even deeper and deeper. I've noticed that the more I commit myself to going deeper in my faith, the more is revealed to me. It's grace.
Right.
I guess.
Right.
But little things will happen where, and some of it is just legitimately a revelation, right? A thought will come into my mind like, well, that was very nice of him that he did that. Maybe I should let him do that more often, right? That's a grace to have that thought for someone like me.
Yeah.
But then acting upon it,
Yeah.
making a conscious decision. And I would always be open with him. I'm struggling with this. And then he would confirm it. Oh, yeah, you do tend to do that.
Yeah.
But he would always wait for me to bring it to him.
Right.
And then he would be receptive of it and journey with me through it.
Right.
And so there was, our whole relationship has been, I'm struggling with this. I just want you to know that I don't mean this, and I'm doing this to work on it.
Right.
And so he would help me, and me for him as well.
Yeah. Well, one more question. How would you describe that feminine genius?
Oh.
Like that complementarity, because it seemed like
Well, to me, it's the one flesh, really. When they come together in that unity, it is a new being. It's a new creation. It is, it's the Trinity here, in a sense, right? God, the husband, and the wife. And what we found in our marriage is that if God is number one for the both of us, spouse is number two, children, if any, are number three, and then work is number four, and everything else goes underneath that. If we keep ourselves in proper order and have obedience to that order, then everything really just falls into place very gracefully, actually. We found when we've had issues, we've stopped and we've gone, okay, do I have things in order? I'm always out of order when there's issues that come up, or he's always put something out of order. And so, and it took us a long time to realize that, but when we keep that order, it leads us deeper into one another, deeper into that one flesh union, deeper into our faith.
Well, thank you so much, Jess. It's been
You
a
are
great
most
conversation.
welcome.
And so keep up the good work, and hopefully we'll connect in LA sometime.
Yes, definitely. You have to come out and see us.